Good morning. My name is Ozgur Savas. I'm glad to be in a country that people can pronounce my name. It is very rare. So I run Cloudflare's EMEA Solutions Engineering Organization. And my responsibility, of course, my organization is responsible anything technical on the sales process. So if you have any questions, you have any new projects, and you are looking to get some new vision, and you want to understand what's going on in the world, our team is the right one, and we have some members of the team currently here. Today, I'll be talking about Cloudflare a bit, and some of our, especially Layer 7 security technologies. Basically, it's the technology to protect your online assets and applications. So before I start, does anyone use Cloudflare in this room? Not the Cloudflare guys sitting here, please. Okay, a few of you. Is there anyone who's never heard of Cloudflare before? Okay. So let's start with this then. So even if you said there was no one who didn't know Cloudflare, of course I was going to show the slide anyway. But just to remind everybody, Cloudflare is basically one of the largest networks in the world, if not the largest. And it is the company that provides reliability, security, and performance services to the companies. And we have our presence all over the world, around 400 data centers and in 285 cities. Around, I think, 92 countries was the last number. And in Turkey, for example, we have 6 data centers, which is actually a pretty high number compared to some other companies. And we have direct connections to 11,000 other companies in the world. So this means actually if you are using Cloudflare as a company to transfer your requests, you will probably be getting to these companies faster than you would do otherwise directly. And our total capacity is 192 terabit per second as of the creation of this slide. But why does it matter? So 192 terabit per second, as soon as you start using Cloudflare services, it becomes your backbone performance as well. Especially if you are subject to a DDoS attack, this becomes extremely important. Considering the largest DDoS attack we have received is 3.3 gigabit per second. Actually, 192 gigabit per second terabit per second is actually providing a significant capacity in order to handle all kinds of DDoS attacks that comes to the world. So I want to clarify, 3.3 terabit per second, not gigabit per second. If you look at Cloudflare portfolio, actually we are specialized in multiple areas of technology that provides security to people. We can talk about Cloudflare portfolio in 4 different technology categories. I can summarize it like application services, zero trust services, network services, and developer services. It can get a bit complicated when we talk it that way, but to make it easier, you can think it like we actually provide 3 different services to protect employees, applications, and network resources. If we start looking into the protecting employees side, this is actually zero trust technologies. You might be familiar. And in the zero trust technologies, basically the key categories are providing secure access to your software as a service applications, or if you have some on-prem applications you're exposing to the internet as a SaaS, you can provide secure access to those. The next one is gateway technology. The gateway is the technology that allows you to access the network securely and also provide some policies for the outbound traffic of your employees. And there are some other technologies like CASB, for example, Cloud Access Security Broker. It's the technology that gives you visibility on the SaaS services. There is data loss prevention to understand DLP, to understand and prevent some of the key data going out of your networks. And we have browser isolation that allows you to control and isolate the traffic going out of the browser of your employees. So basically, you can restrict what your employees can do using an internet browser to protect your environment. And finally, we also have email security that other companies do not have. The reason we put email security and specifically phishing protection into our zero trust portfolio is basically we identified 91% of the breaches that's been successful are actually starting with a phishing attack. That's why for us, phishing protection is actually part of the zero trust protection. On the right-hand side, we have the protecting networks. There we have some key solutions in order to protect your network environment, to access to your network. For example, we can isolate your network completely from the internet by carrying over your BGP announcements, and anyone who wants to access to your networks has to go through the Cloudflare environment. We also provide one as a service solution. This means like an SD-WAN solution that your companies might be using today. It's actually providing access, connectivity between your sites, but in our one as a service solution, we connect your networks directly to our cloud environment, so nothing goes beyond the Cloudflare network. The one in the middle is a bit more interesting for us, especially for gaming companies. So that's the place that we'll be spending more of our time. And when you look at the gaming industry, what is happening in terms of security threats in the gaming industry? We see three categories are actually becoming extremely important. That's valid for many companies, but gaming companies are a bit more susceptible to this type of attacks. So first one is denial of service attacks. And the denial of service attacks, you know, is basically an attack type trying to abuse, sending huge amount of traffic to your resources in order to take it down. The one in the middle is the bot traffic and bot attacks. Actually, a significant part of the internet traffic is run by the bots at the moment, and many of those are also using APIs, but many of those are actually accessing to your origins in order to run some, to create an attack and exploit the vulnerabilities of on your environment. And the last one is web application attacks. So these are natural attacks that we all know, like defined by the OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project, which is an organization that we all know in order to provide some signatures and the repository of the attacks that's all known by the world. But also attacks that's defined by Cloudflare, that's been seen by Cloudflare, and we create protections against those type of attacks as well. Web application firewall, basically any attack type like injection, cross-site scripting, or broken authentication requests, this type of attacks can be prevented by the web application firewalls. And also APIs. The gaming companies, we are using APIs a lot, and we also have an API protection. There we will spend a bit more time today. When you look at the Cloudflare application security portfolio, you can see these 7 categories. Actually, we have a bit more solutions than those, but these are the main ones that are 6 categories. These are the main ones our customers are using. So application DDoS is basically any DDoS traffic that comes to your environment that we can prevent. So for example, we are seeing gaming companies are being the main targets of the DDoS attacks in the world. So for example, in the layer 7 DDoS attacks, you can see most of the world, 3 out of 7 on this picture. In most of the world, the attacks, the gaming companies are the primary targets for this type of attacks requests. And actually, the largest layer 7 attack we have seen has happened in February. And you can see the number of requests was 71 million requests per second. So you might think about the number of requests per second coming to a natural website or an application or a game, and this request request number is extremely abusive. And this one interesting thing about this attack was 71 million requests per second was generated using very high-powered infrastructure. Normally, DDoS attacks happen using botnets, and you can actually rent a botnet for $250 for 2 hours by going to darknet, let's say 15,000 endpoints, and you can generate a very easy layer 3, 4 attack. But when it comes to layer 7 attacks, you need to deal with encryption, you need to deal with opening the sessions, etc., and it requires a lot of processing power. So that's why this 71 million requests per second was extremely scary, because the attackers used public cloud environment like Google, AWS, etc. So they actually paid for those services paid really highly in order to generate this type of attack. And it was done towards a gaming company. So this shows you the importance of having a very strong DDoS infrastructure for your environment. When it comes to layer 3 for DDoS, again, gaming companies are extremely popular. You can see it's the second most popular target in terms of layer 3 for DDoS attacks. And we have a different mechanism to prevent those type of attacks. One of them was what we call magic transit. Basically, we can isolate your network completely from the internet. Another one is very popular by the gaming companies, what we call Spectrum. If you have an application or a game that's using particular TCP, UDP ports, we can use a reverse proxy solution directly protecting this particular traffic going to those particular ports. So the actual gamers or the attackers will not be accessing directly to your origin, but will be accessing through Cloudflare. And the second one you saw here was the WAF advanced rate limiting, and the next one is bot management, so let me quickly go through those as well. So web application firewall is something that every company does. I mean, every company says that they are providing layer 7 security, has to do a web application firewall. And as I mentioned, OWASP describes the key types of attacks, and companies develop solutions for those. And every company offers also custom ruling, so this means you can define your own rules in order to prevent certain type of attacks. But most important rules for us, most important skill of a Cloudflare web application firewall in our view is actually our managed rules, Cloudflare managed rules. This means any attack that we see anywhere in the world, we can take a protection immediately to protect the rest of the world. So for example, 2 years ago, we had a Log4j attack, which was an injection attack, and it completely destroyed the internet, so a lot of people were hacked, thousands we are talking about. And Cloudflare was able to identify this Log4j attack 9 hours before any other company. Because Cloudflare carries more than 20% of all internet. And in fact, 79% of any website in the world who uses any type of DDoS protection using a reverse proxy is actually using Cloudflare. And the second one is around 5%, 5.2%. So there's a very high chance 1 out of 5 websites that you are visiting will be protected by Cloudflare, and any website that is protected, 4 out of 5 will be protected by Cloudflare. So that's why we see a lot of traffic. Any attack that goes to those websites is automatically giving us intelligence. And many of those protection mechanisms are provided by free by Cloudflare. So we actually serve we have a mission to make the internet a better place. That's why we give those services for free to a certain level. So 96% of our customers never pay us any dime. So that's why we see a lot of bad traffic as well, because people using our free services, bad people are also using our free services as well. So as soon as we identify an attack in one data center, 400 other data centers will be automatically informed about that particular attack, so we can immediately protect anyone else. And our power is actually coming from the size of our network as well, because we stop the attacks where it starts. It never comes, travels around the internet. It never comes to your origins. When it comes to the bot defenses, there is very simple criteria. So what we need to do when we receive a bot traffic, first we need to identify, is it a human or a bot? Simple. Then we identify, is it a good bot or a bad bot? Simple. Not so simple. So when we receive a traffic, we have a huge database of bots that we know, good bots or bad bots. So it might be search engine optimization bots. So that is a good bot. So any website want to see that type of bot, they want to allow it. But when it comes to bots that's using credential stuffing, for example, we don't want to allow this type of bot. And if it's a very well-known bot, malicious bot, we can easily identify it because we have a significant database of those. So that's why we use different engines to identify the bots. So in Cloudflare, we rate the bots from a scale of 1 to 99. So if it's a known bot, definitely a bot, and 100% a bad bot, we know it gets a score of 1. If it's 100% human, gets a score of 99. But what happens if the score is 17? So there actually we need to do a bit of a challenge, and I'm pretty sure all of you hate CAPTCHAs. And one of the things Cloudflare did for the world is actually eliminating CAPTCHAs. So you might have not noticed, but you are seeing significantly less number of CAPTCHAs for the last 3-4 months. It's because any website that's using Cloudflare is using an artificial intelligence technology that we created that is eliminating the use of CAPTCHA. So we actually challenge the traffic to identify if it's a bot or not without actually showing a CAPTCHA. We do it at the back end using some signatures of the client traffic. We evaluate the profile of the traffic. So we use a lot of machine learning, JavaScript detections, etc., to identify if something is a bot or not. What about APIs? Okay, everything I said so far is actually areas companies are investing heavily. But one thing we noticed is that the companies are not investing very heavily is actually protecting APIs separately. So let's think about a web application firewall. It will check if it's an attack traffic or not, if it's a legitimate traffic or not. If it's a legitimate traffic, it will pass. If it's an abusive traffic, our DDoS protection system, most probably, it will stop. But what happens if it's a legitimate API request, goes to your API endpoints, which are open to the internet? If you look at 58%, if you look at the total internet traffic, 58% of the internet traffic is actually through APIs. So we say 58% of the traffic observed by Cloudflare, but because we see more than 20% of the traffic, it's a good sample. So actually, more than half of the internet traffic is APIs. So there is a lot of discussion about the APIs, and when you talk to the companies and when you look at some research, you find out most of the companies do not even know how many API endpoints they expose to the internet. So if you go to a security department and they might, if they are super, super good, they might give you a list of all API endpoints and what type of requests that they are receiving. But, 9 out of 10 times they will not even know how many exactly that they have. And according to this research, actually 74% of the companies do not even know half of their API endpoints. So this means they do not protect those endpoints. But what's the risk out there? Here you see examples of 4 companies that's been hacked using some API attacks. And you can see there are different of API attacks, specifically abusing or exploiting API vulnerabilities. I mentioned about OWASP. OWASP was actually formed to keep a list of the application level attacks. But because API attacks became so prominent, they actually had to come up with a list of the top 10 list of the top API attacks. And here you see the number 1 is actually shadow rogue APIs. That's what I was mentioning in the previous slide. Actually, companies do not even know what APIs are open to the internet. And especially if you are working in a company with lots of developers, and I bet gaming companies have lots of developers, and developers like to create APIs, you have a lot of APIs you don't know about. The other one, data exfiltration, exploiting known API vulnerabilities. For example, weak authentication or broken authentication. If I go to the previous slide, you see T-Mobile, Just Dial, Venmo, they were all hacked using this particular vulnerability in the APIs. And lack of resources, excessive resource consumption is actually talking about receiving API traffic that might be legitimate, that might be 100% fitting into the profile of an API traffic that we want to see in our environment. However, it is abusive, repetitive traffic. So you need to have a protection method that can identify those. These will not be identified by a web application firewall. So what are the key features of an API security? So first thing first, identify the rogue APIs, shadow APIs. For that, we do shadow API discovery. API discovery will show you all the API endpoints exposed to the internet. And sequential anomaly detection allows you actually what APIs need to follow each other. Let me give an example. For example, let's say you are using a banking application, and every time you use one request, you send one request to your banking application, it is hitting a different API. Let's say I want to see my balance, I am hitting a balance API. If I want to do a transfer, I am hitting the payment API. And we know for a fact, if you want to do a payment, first thing you need to do is actually to check your balance, because system forces you to see your balance to make sure you have adequate funds to make that transfer. Sequential anomaly detection means, in this particular example, every time I receive an API request going to the payment API, I need to see a balance API request just before that. So there is a sequence out there. So if I receive 100 payment API requests, one after another, without first hitting the balance API, this means there is a lack of sequence out there, and it's an attack traffic. The other parts of doing is actually defining a schema for your API environment. So let's say we have 10 API endpoints, and within those API endpoints, we know exactly what those API requests should look like. Going back to the banking example, a balance API should be a GET request, right? Because I am asking for an information from the bank. I am not sending information. I'm asking for an information. That's a GET request. If I see a POST request or a delete request coming to my balance API, that's actually an invalid API. So if I define my schema very well, I would identify this as an attack very easily. And also, within the schema, you can define what type of request that you might receive. Is it a JSON, or is it an XML, or what type of authentication does it use? Is it MTLS, or is it using O2, or is it using JWT? So we are defining all those in the schema. So what's the amount of traffic that should come to that API? Let's say if I'm a weather API, and the amount of traffic I'm serving is less than 1 megabit per second per request, and I'm receiving a very large request, it doesn't look legitimate. So we can identify all those actually as part of our schema. And MTLS and JWT are methods of authentication. Basically, MTLS stands for Mutual TLS, Transport Layer Security. It provides security in layer 4 in the transport layer. And basically, it lets the client and server to authenticate each other using a certificate authority. Or if you are using a JWT authentication, that's a layer 7 authentication using token and private keys. So you can actually define those requests as part of your schema to mandate every request should fit into that request authentication method. And volumetric API detects if traffic profile doesn't look real. So that's like a DDoS attack coming to particularly to your APIs. And sensitive data detection, we can detect the type of the data that's going through the API. I mean, we can identify if the request is including any personally identifiable information, like an ID or a passport number, credit card number, like social security number, etc. At the end, the API, we have a solution in Cloudflare called API Gateway, previously called API Shield. And basically what we do is we can monitor and manage your whole API endpoint portfolio from a single point that any other security solution won't do. Here's an example. If I don't think my laser is showing on that screen, but if you look at the right-hand side to the table, you see a GET request going to that particular API endpoint, and the request limit is 220, recommended request limit. What this means is, if you don't know the profile of your APIs, and you don't know what type of traffic is coming to your API network, we actually recommend you how the schema looks like, and we can help you to enforce a policy, what we call positive security model, that is mandating this type of profile. In this example, you see that API is suggesting you should expect around 220 requests per 10 minutes. So this is a recommended amount. So what you would do, I mean, you could define a schema that is limiting the number of requests to, let's say, 250, right? And here is another example. Looking into the API performance, if I know my API should have no latency than 2.1 seconds, and you can see all this average latency has been defined. If the latency goes up, you know something goes wrong. So it might be an API abuse, or it might be something wrong with your API endpoint. And you can constantly follow those. I think the most cool thing here is once you see that API list of your API endpoints from the discovery, and once we give you all these parameters, you can click on a button and create a rule immediately. So what I said that we are suggesting that you should limit it to 220, you can actually click on that button and create a rule to make that 220. And I already mentioned about the authentication methods. So currently, this slide shows MTLS as an example. Both client and server to authenticate each other, but you can use other methods. And auto authentication, we don't support at the moment, but it's the authentication method that you can use to connect to a third party to do the authentication. For example, you want to give access to the APIs through a social media authentication. I wouldn't suggest that, but people like to do that for simplicity. Okay, and this is my last slide. That's a summary, actually. If you think about complete API security, you need to think about all those different aspects. Complete application security, you need to think about all the areas within your application and protect those. So as I said, layer 3 and layer 7 DDoS attacks are extremely popular against gaming companies because people want to steal the gaming tokens, people want to get some profit by obtaining the credentials of other people, etc. And in order to prevent some of those, you need to have a mechanism with a strong authentication. You need to create a positive API model defining very, very, very specifically what a request coming to your API should look like. It has to use JSON. It has to hit to the certain endpoint. And anomaly detection, any anomaly that happens against your schema should be taken action. So you have to follow those really, really quickly and also define what sensitive data is for your environment to prevent any leaks. So let us help you. I know the colors not look great, but yeah, we have a very big team of gaming specialized team in Cloudflare, and some of those members are sitting here. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions, and I might ask some of my experts to help me with those as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.